Well, hello, everybody. My name is Patrick Klein. We have a wonderful little discussion here today to talk about our fantastic one-man show, Aren't You? And I thank you all so much for being here at our webinar and to meet these fabulous folks who have created an entirely original and different type of piece of theater for you. So let's just get started. So first, let me introduce everybody here. We have Mr. Fred Pitts, who is the writer, the experiencer, the writer, and the performer for this show, of course. We have David Ford, who's helped develop the show at the Marsh, I believe, right, David?
That's correct.
Great, thank you. And of course, Sean J. West, who has directed the show for us, for Fred, and is carrying his direction onto our production here as well. So welcome to you all, and thank you, the three of you, for being here this evening. I really appreciate your time, and I can't wait to hear all about how this show came to be. This is
thanks,
awesome.
Patrick.
So my pleasure. So let's just get started in this. So Fred, first, why don't you start, Fred, and talk to us about how this show came about, give us a background, what sort of created the impetus to make this beautiful piece?
Well, short version, started with trips to California missions. Well, one particular trip to Solano mission, and the conversation I had with a little old lady who just was interested in the fact that I was the only Black person around. And that kind of motivated, not that conversation, but the idea of seeing that mission motivated me to see all of them, because I'm a history geek and I figured I hadn't seen any of them. So on that trip, just innocently, I just started noticing interactions with individuals where they would, trying to be very friendly, say I looked like some famous Black person. And then the first time was just, it happens. But then as it kept happening over and over and over again, and different people, a couple of people mistook me for some other, Black person. I was posting this on social media at the time, which back then was just really where you just posted all the things that happened in your life. It wasn't what it is now. And people were reading it every day, and I was getting comments of what happened today and who did you look like today. And a couple of friends said, you probably should make this into a solo piece. And I'm not a solo performer, I'm just, just an actor. So I said, okay, well, I'll just pull all the posts down, save them in a file. And when the time was right, I think it was 2017, I finally enrolled in David's class just to see what we can come up with. And really the rest is history, to use a cliche. That's kind of what happened.
That's great. So that's a good segue for David. So David, is there a specific process for someone who comes to you with an idea for a show? How do you develop these different works in the classes and seminars that you provide?
Yeah, there is a specific process. It's specific to each individual who comes in with a show idea. Because if there's anything interesting about watching the writer perform their own work, it's to hear them respond with as much authenticity as they can muster. So if as a director, I start like imposing my ideas on it, I feel like everybody's going to know that's BS. So, when somebody like Fred comes into, it was interesting for him to come into a class, somebody who has some real performance chops and is got a really fast moving mind, and had this crazy story of being mistaken for one celebrity, Black celebrity after another. And then another thing that he was bringing to it was a really deep passion for history. And that became such an interesting part of the process, is how does he find a way to take that passion for history and make it something that makes sense in a theatrical language.
So that's an interesting question, because it really is two separate avenues in the show that come together very beautifully throughout. So I'm curious, when you were in the process of developing the show, was it always the intention to sort of meld the love of history with the experience, or how did that come to be?
it just kind of evolved, I guess, is the best way of describing it. You know, I had no idea what the show was going to be like. You know, and I just, you know, worked with David's guidance. It was over about a year process of just doing, you know, classes where, you know, the first 12-week class, we did the first 7 missions, and then that evolved into the second 12-week class where it was the next 7, and then finally the third. And as we did it, it just kind of morphed into the entity that it is now, because as David said, we started looking at, you know, the other aspects of the show, you know, the history part of it. I mean, initially for me, it was just like, this is crazy, look what happened. But then it was, okay, it's, you know, it's identifying me as whatever Black person you can think of. It's some of the interactions which were a little less than racially harmonious. It is, you know, happening while I'm trying to indulge my love for history. And the more we worked in class, the more we figured how to make those two work together. Because for me, it was discovering, you know, the history of the missions, but also the Native American history that, you know, a lot of the story wasn't told initially, but now is being told more. And of course, I can relate to that as an African American in this country, because a lot of my own history, you know, as I talked about, has been raised or moved over, or just removed, or just not spoken of. And we were able to work and find how all that relates together and kind of put it together into one story.
It's interesting to, you know, the wonderful Bay Area writer Anne Lamott wrote a book about writing called Bird by Bird, where she kind of talks like, just take it one step at a time. And, you know, on some level, that's what Fred was doing by taking it mission by mission. But, you know, that provides a framework for the piece. But there's, you know, the things in theater that are interesting are the things that don't add up, that don't make sense, that contradict, that are jarring juxtapositions. So, you know, Fred came in saying how much he liked going to European cathedrals, and that was part of the motivation to go to the California missions. It's like, oh, let's go look at these beautiful old churches. And, you know, most of the missions are still run by the Catholic Church, and consequently, they have a certain kind of approach to history. And, you know, if you go to all the missions, eventually you start realizing that there is a history of the Native Americans that is, you have to kind of dig around for, literally in some cases, because literally it's the bodies buried around the mission churches, or the bodies that nobody has been able to find, because they know how many people died at some of the missions, usually from disease. So there's these very sort of disturbing aspects of it. But at the same time, you know, you can't do a story about a bunch of churches without having to talk about God. And so it was interesting asking Fred, like, what was your experience of God? And Fred, take it away.
Yeah, it was just me, and you know, growing up in the Black Baptist Church, and it was part of my life as a kid, and used to scare me as a kid because, you know, church services were always loud and raucous, and as a kid, it was just scary to me. But, you know, as an adult now, I love it, clearly. But that was one of the other aspects of the missions is examining, you know, the faith aspect of the missions and where that came from, and looking at, you know, my own, you know, faith in my life, and just what, you know, that has been and meant to me. So that was.
And then how many years of Catholic school did you go to?
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, from sixth grade to 12th grade. Yeah. So I knew about it, you know, and I, you know,
that'll leave a mark.
Yeah, and I tell the story in the, you know, show. It was like, you know, I had, you know, quiet church in the week, and then loud and scary for me on the weekends, you know, when I'm with my own church. But, you know, I going to Catholic school, what for me was a positive experience. It was different than my own church, but it really helped me to, I mean, it really did help me to be more comfortable going to my own church, because for me, it wasn't just this, you know, people behaving, acting differently than I was used to, but I could finally see, okay, this is about, joy and happiness and their faith, and there's different ways of doing it. So it was interesting growing up as a Protestant in the Catholic, in Catholic school, but it kind of turned me into who I am today. So.
And clearly ignited an interest in just the history of the church and the different types of church, Catholic churches and things.
Still have the history of religion. One of my favorites.
Yeah.
All of it.
David, I'm sorry I cut you off.
No, I was just going to say when Father, what's his name? Who was it who started talking to you at the San Francisco? Was it at the San Francisco Mission, or you ended up talking to him later? But you're not afraid to talk to priests.
I'm not. No, I thought many of them came up and said things to me, at many of these missions, very, just having conversations, like the one who was so happy about the fact that, like, Father Tolton, the first Black priest in America who's on, I think, the second level now, going toward the priesthood. Going toward sainthood. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And did he think he looked like you?
Well, he was the one who said, "Did you ever, who he is, and you could be his descendant. Have you ever seen his picture because you look just like him? Has anyone ever told you that?" Statement? Yeah.
Just another celebrity.
Celebrity that no one's heard of.
So that's really interesting. So that is the show right there. I mean, you discuss the mission, the history of the mission, any interesting facts you've heard about it, but then you also discuss your experience when you stepped into the mission, interacting.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that at all, or did I summarize it well?
You summarized it well.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell people to come see the show.
I'm just going to say, if you come see the show, you'll understand why a whole bus full of Japanese tourists have pictures of Fred. I'm just going to leave it at that.
No spoilers. Yeah, I think that's one of the real wonderful things about the show is that you being somebody who really doesn't know much about the missions. I learned a lot about the missions listening to it, but then I also learned this whole other aspect about bias and all these other things, and it's presented so brilliantly. And I think you and David did a wonderful job of creating that piece. But then we have Sanjay here. Now I want to know, Sanjay, how did you get attached to the show, and what were your first thoughts when you read the script, and how are you going to put this on stage? All these wonderful things.
Well, I got dragged into this by.
You didn't get dragged into this. Oh, stop.
We were doing some show together, and he mentioned it, and he knew that I directed, and so for some reason he thought I would be a good fit, maybe because I'm bossy. I think
because I know you.
What drew me to the script once I read it was just, I love one people show, because you have the ability to change it up every time you do it, but still keep the continuity of what you mean. And so I think when I read the script, I saw, and the show that Fred and I had done was a character totally different than who he is. So when I read the script, I was like, oh, I can see him doing this. Of course, I saw the actor aspect of Fred doing it, and then there's also the real Fred who experienced this. So I think for me, it was bringing those two worlds together to tell a story about an experience that is often mirrored by many Black people in America being mistaken for totally different people. So I wanted to help tell that story, and also the story about the indigenous folks. So I think that aspect really spoke to me too, so that we don't often hear that side of of American history told truthfully and fully. So I appreciated that aspect of it. So
this is probably a naive question, but what is it? What's different between a person just standing in front of a group and telling a story versus a one-man show? What were the differences?
That's all you, Sanjay. David.
Well, the difference is telling a story is sort of like, there's the TED Talk form of presentation, which everyone is familiar with. And then there is someone getting up and just talking like a comedian per se, but their point is to make you laugh and also think. And I think for me, a one-person show has all those elements, but also you're also the actor or the one person is also very vulnerable and very raw. So they don't have anyone else to lean on if they per se go up on a line. But also because of that, they can volley easier. Like if they want to tell a different aspect of that same story, they can. It's sort of, unless it's a light cue or sound cue, right?
Yeah.
But they have the ability to be a little bit more fluid and a little bit more flexible. And it's similar to you get up on the stage, tell a story, but you also have to live the story and bring that story to life. So you just can't simply open a book, tell the story. It has to be engaging. It has to be levels so that the audience doesn't nod off, but also you want them to leave with something. So you want them to feel something, to either them go, oh, or see something in their own behavior that has been spoken about in the piece. And maybe they think and go, oh, I did that. So I think the good thing about a one-person show, also the person gets to talk to the audience if they want to. They can break that fourth wall. Well, the fourth wall is gone. They can totally interact with an audience member if they so choose, physically distance and safely, of course. And so that aspect of it, I think, is a great thing. Whereas when you give a speech or you give a TED talk, you're kind of limited to what you can and can't do. Whereas with the one-person show, there are no rules, I think.
I want to add a little to that about the living it, because I think a lot of what I'm encouraging people to do is, rather than telling you what happened, to say, okay, come stand next to me. And this person comes up to you and says, you look just like, and how does that feel? You're experiencing that with Fred, and you're kind of going, okay, I get how that feels. And it's one of the interesting things about human beings, we're like snowflakes. I once started doing this with a bunch of Republicans in the room, and they were all like, we're not snowflakes, but no. What I mean is we're like snowflakes in that we are all different. There are no two human beings alike. And yet snowflakes are an awful similar group of things, and human beings are awfully similar. And when Fred invites you to stand next to him and have these experiences or have these discoveries as he's delving into California history, or have these experiences that that just don't make sense because race in this country just doesn't make sense. So there's a lot of absurdity and a lot of laughs. And I mean, I think we haven't said it's a really funny piece, because things are so absurd. They get absurd really fast.
Yeah.
But to be able to stand next to Fred and kind of have that experience with him, I kind of feel like, yeah, that's the gold standard.
Now, for you, Fred, I just curious, because I'm sure you said you had kind of collected your Facebook stories and started to meld them into a script. And how did you feel with the first time you had that script and you showed it to David and said, can this be a piece of theater? Or was it like, because it's totally foreign to you, right? Writing for a solo performance.
Well, I hadn't written anything in my life. Well, that's not true. I mean, I wrote, but not anything theatrical. I'm basically an actor, and my life has been performing works written by other people with other people on the stage. I've been in shows with one performer, and I've done solo pieces or been on stage with 30-minute monologues, but that's different. And so walking into his class, I mean, I didn't know what to expect. I've seen solo performances. I mean, I'm a fan of the Marsh. I've been going there for, how long I've lived in San Francisco, which was since '97. Seeing the Margaret Gomez's and, the Brian Copelands and the Don Reed. So I knew what solo shows were. That wasn't me, I didn't think. And so when I walked in just with I think it was 2 pages of all the posts that were in a Microsoft Word format, and I just kind of read through it. I thought, okay, we'll see where this goes. And I think the first thing David says, okay, that happened. Let's turn this into a story that we can flesh out and tell. And that's kind of how it started. So it really was just, systematically fleshing out all of the pieces. What's my background? That's where we talked about the history. That's where we talked about my history of the faith in my life. What did I want to get out of the missions? Why did they go? And so, who did you interact with? What was that person like? What did she sound like? What did he sound like? That kind of thing. So it was a combination of just fleshing it all out and taking that experience and turning it into just basically recreating what exactly had happened as opposed to having a summary. So it was bringing that experience back to life in its fullest, as David said, bringing the people up next to me, and that's what Sanjay is talking about. So, working through the characters. I've got 34 people I do in this show thereabout. So it's just, trying to get the nuances of each person because they're all different. So that's the joy and the challenge of it. So, and the fun of it. So that's a kind of a roundabout way of not answering your question, but
yeah, that's and that's a lot of the theatricality we're talking about, right? Is when you become those different characters on the stage versus just saying, and then she said, and then he said. It's more of becoming those people, and I think that's a lot of just so much fun watching the show. So we started this little
can I ask
two-page.
Can
Yes.
I ask a question?
Yes,
I just
please.
wanted to ask Fred, how did your grandmother end up in this piece? And you want to do a little of her? I just love hearing from your grandmother.
No, I'm not
Yeah,
going to do
come
No, I'm
on.
not going to do a spoiler. Not going to do a spoiler.
Well,
Or I might.
how would she answer me if I asked
My
how she ended up
grandmother
in
would,
this piece?
my grandmother would look at you and go, bless your heart. That's what she would say. She'd turn around and walk away. My grandmother got into it because we were talking about my history we were talking about my childhood and my relationship with church, scary when I was a kid and didn't want to go to church in the morning. And we had this whole little scenario about what it was like when my mother and father would try to get me to get out of bed to go to church and how much of a struggle that was. And then I think in round 2, we were talking about the Baptist minister I had growing up, Reverend Davis, not his real name, but that's what we're calling him, Reverend Davis. And I think I made a statement to you, David, about, the minister of my grandmother's church, which is the first time he'd heard my grandmother mentioned. And it kind of went from there. It was like I think you asked me what she was like and what she sounded like, and I did her. And then we just kind of went from there. I don't even remember how exactly we started weaving her in and out of things, but she basically became, the voice of reason, if you want to call it that, throughout the show.
Yeah.
Kind of how it worked.
The only common sense.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
It's amazing. So it's been through. You started as like a little 2-page thing you mentioned, and I'm sure it's seen several different iterations. So tell me how the show has changed over the years and how it's kind of arrived where it is going to be on the 20th.
Well, it was 3 parts, and then it was the whole piece, which I did. I think the first time I premiered the whole piece was with I think it was with the Playground. That was January of 2019, I believe. That was my first live performance of the show, and I was lucky, and I was still working, taking care of patients back then, and I was lucky enough to contract the flu the day before, because it was like I was kind of getting sick the night that David and I were rehearsing it beforehand, and then the next day, which was right before show day, I had a fever of 103.5 for tech, and so I spent the next 24 hours, trying to medicate myself when I did the show. I was the first show to open the festival, and I was backstage with piles of howls and cold medication, and I walked out and I did the show, and I honestly don't remember it. No memory. I remember the second one I did at Playground because David was there in the balcony, and then after that I did it for, I think it was the Marsh Rising, which is a once a month thing where someone who has a solo show that could be a show that could be produced somewhere, you perform it, and I did it there for the executive director for the Marsh, Stephanie Wiseman, who really liked the show. And then from that point, that was where Sanjay, I think, saw the show the first time, I believe. And then after that, the whole show at least. And then after that, we did it, and that's where Sanjay came in as director. We did it at a solo festival in Redwood City, and then a solo festival, and then I produced a couple things at Piano Fight, and it's essentially the same show it's been since the Playground days. We've tweaked a few things, you know, a few characters tweaked a little bit, but the basis of the show is essentially the same. You know, it's missions, it's the people I look like, it's the history. We performed it in a small space. We performed it, you know, from my living room on Zoom, and now it's in a big space. And this is the first time. This is what Sanjay was talking about earlier with trying to make the show malleable for location. This is the first time we're doing the show without the flip chart, which has been such an integral part. We're now doing the missions on a big slide projector behind us because, you know, Palo Alto Players is a big house, and there will be people in the back who can't see. So it's just easier to have those images up, you know. And then even what we're also doing is, you know, we've got images up of me with my person next to me, because what works in the show is holding the picture up to my face saying, this is who they think I look like. Are you kidding? So if you can't see that, you lose that. So that's been, you know, exciting, because, you know, in the beginning, and Sanjay can attest to this, I was a little hesitant to change a lot of it, but now that we're doing it, it's like, yeah, this is, I see exactly what he's saying. You know, it's a show that hopefully can just be done anywhere, you know.
What did you think, Sanjay, when you saw the space, the Palace Player space?
Go ahead.
So I like changing stuff. That's just my name. Even on jobs, I come in, I assess, and I go, hey, have you thought about doing it this way? I think when I first saw the show, I saw it was like a snippet. And then I saw
that's right.
I saw the full show. And of course, Fred knows me well enough to know that I had notes afterwards. And so I was like, have you thought about, and I like moving things using like media stuff, because I think it frees up the actor to actually use their body more and be more engaged with the audience. So when he said, I'm going to Palo Alto Players and they have a thrust stage or a proscenium stage, I was like, yes. Yes. Because that, for me, it elevates the piece even more so. And then it also frees up the actor. So Fred has now, and I tell him this, I want to see you energize your body more. Like there's no more flip charts you have to worry about. So now you can totally use your space. And I'm also an actor, and I'm an actor who likes to use my space. And it's just, if you use your space wisely, so you just don't walk stage right for the sake of walking stage right, everything has to have a purpose. So I think now we have the ability for him to use his whole body, which I think engages more with the audience and also moves the story along more. So I think you now have him telling about his grandmother, for instance, when he gets to be fully into her and you're there experiencing that, you're like, oh my gosh, that's kind of funny. You know, like you forget that you're watching someone tell a story about being mistaken again and again and again for other Black folks. So I think those levels on this stage in that space, and then like the technical stuff that we're adding, is like, makes me very happy. Very happy.
Yeah, I think if I recall his reaction the first, you know, what was it, maybe a month ago, where we all came down and I showed him the stage for the first time. I think he just kind of stood on the stage for a second and gave me that look he gives me when it was kind of like, oh, you have no idea what you've just given me. I was like, yes, I do, Sean. I know what I've given you. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely, it gets a different kind of life. I wouldn't say another life, but it gets a different kind of life in a big space. And,
yeah.
You know.
I'm excited to see it on, you know, with this much space, because it is more alive with more space, because, you know, you're freeing yourself up to really verbally and physically tell the story. the examples of, one moment when we're trying to go through, the missions at the end kind of quickly, it's now about moving from side to side, rather quickly to show that's how we're moving, and then slowing down when we need to, which you really can't do when you're in the confines of your living room with the camera here and the flip chart here and the pictures there. You're just kind of stuck. So a lot of fun.
That's a good segue to my next question, because I'm wondering, okay, everybody's been off from doing theater for a year and a half now. What's it like for you, Fred, and for you, Sanjay, to step back into these shoes, to get sort of dust it off and get back at it, especially a show that you wrote, Fred?
I'll let Sanjay answer first.
Wow, way to go. Dodge that bullet.
Well, someone in the chat just said, any questions for Sanjay? I was like, I'm gonna let Sanjay fill this one.
I think for me, this past year and a half has been challenging when it comes to theater, and I'm very particular of how I receive my theater. So the Zoomiverse for me did not work for theater because I miss that energy that you get from being in person. And so I think everyone was jumping on the Zoomiverse, and I think some did it well, some did it not so well. And so I think for me, being part of some of those was like, oh, I never want to do that again. Oh, I never need to do that again. Oh, I never need to see that again. And I think I've been still engaged in theater this past year and a half. And I think for me, the aspect of being on a physical stage is really great, because that's where theater, I believe, and feel actually comes alive, because you get to feel it, you get to experience it. And I think through the Zoomiverse, it's basically acting for the camera. So you're watching either a sitcom or a movie or series, and so you don't get the same aspect of what theater is actually for. So I think I'm excited, and I'm excited for people to see it in this space, because I think because it's physically distanced, you get to be safe and also experience this moment of coming back to the theater experience, so that now you can, this is a good way to ease yourself back into the real world of theater.
Yep. I couldn't say any better. That's why I had him answer it.
Can I say how much I've missed hearing you, the audience, laugh?
Yes.
Oh my
Oh my
God.
goodness. Yeah.
Because I worked with a lot of people, and they've created some stuff that's really funny, and to not be able to hear your response just is like, would drive a man to drink.
Yeah.
It's just
No, I'm really excited to be on stage and to be in front of an audience. I mean, I did a solo piece like 6 weeks ago, and we had a small invited audience, like maybe 10 people in there, but it's so, you miss it as a performer, because that energy drives you. It really does. When you're doing, especially when you're doing a solo piece, if you're doing it to a camera, you're hoping the audience is reacting or laughing, but it's different when you've actually done it before an audience, you've gotten the reaction, then you do it in the camera and the reactions aren't there. It's you can do it, but it's just not the same. Especially doing this piece in front of a live audience, I get hopefully people will come, and I get to hear them react, whatever that reaction is. Instead of me talking into what seems like a vacuum, just here's my story, here's my truth. I hope you laugh, because we think it's funny, and I can't wait to hear that reaction, because as actors we love to perform, but I think I think that people, and this is my opinion, I think people do theater, at least I do theater, because I love interacting with the actors or with the audience. I really do. I mean, I've done film in the past, which is fine, but it's a different animal. But for me, there is an absolute joy of going out in front of an audience, not knowing what their reaction is going to be that night, not knowing what will go right and what might go wrong with your fellow, actors on stage. But that's a joy you really can't describe until you experience it. And then once you do, you're hooked.
And getting back to sort of the solo performance as a chance to kind of stand in another person's shoes and have their experience. so often the laughter is you're laughing because you recognize what that person's going through. That laughter recognition is just feels like, oh yeah, we can understand each other. We can understand each other. So to not be able to have that, it just feels like it ends up culturally, we end up missing a significant part of how we can unite ourselves as a society, and to be able to sit and laugh and go, yeah, I get what that person's going through. I would feel the same way if I was in his shoes.
Well, I've got one last question for you all, and this is for anybody who wants to take it, or all of you. What do you hope the audiences will take away from the show?
I'm going last.
You may have to go first, Fred.
No, I'll dive in. You know, it's just a chance to kind of live lightly with the absurdity that is, you know, why our ancestors decided to push this thing we call race that has no biological or you know, personal meaning, push that into the foreground of how we define ourselves, and just to watch how that plays out in all the just nonsensical, it's just nonsensical ways. And I think Fred just does a great job of capturing that.
I'm gonna let Chandra go.
I think I have many things I want them to take away, but I think probably the biggest thing is that history isn't always honest. So I think my hope is that people take away from this is that go out and learn it, as opposed to being blindly guided by who won, because that they're the ones who tell the story. So I think go out and find not only your history, but the history that's around you, that will often inform how you move through the world and how you interact with folks when you actually know the real history, and be open to it. Like, be open to experiencing and learning the true history and growing from that.
How do I top that?
You have to. You said you wanted to go last, so that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
I don't have to top it. Well, I mean, and Sean Jay hits the nail on the head. There's a line I have in the show that says, history depends on who's teaching it and what they want you to remember. And as someone who spent his entire life reading history, in the beginning it was, very narrowly taught and very narrowly written about in encyclopedias. And as I've gotten older, you read every different, different points of view. I think that's important in life. It is being open to learning and listening to other voices. Not just about history, just about life. There's an importance that comes with being empathic. Being willing to open yourself up and maybe exist or walk in the shoes of someone who's different than you. I think that's the best way for you to understand what someone else is going through. We all spend most of our time existing and looking at the world through our own lens, for better, for worse. And I think the best way for us to live and to grow is to be willing to look through the eyes of someone else, because I think that just helps us grow as people. As far as Sean just pointed about the history, that's absolutely true. I mean, I only read history. I make the joke about the fact that I had 740 history books on my library wall over here at one point, and I read history because I think it's far more fascinating to read about what actually happened than some of the stuff we make up, because the stuff that really happened is crazy. And I think with every event, there are 2, 3, 4, 5 sides to the same event. So I think it's important for people to be willing, hopefully willing, to read all of the different sides of the one event. That way you can come at it in a different way and get a better understanding of it. And from a general point of view, just come in and enjoy the show, laugh, learn something. Seriously.
Excellent.
And
you're making history. You're making history by being the first solo performer in the Modern Palette Players history. So
I know, and I'm very grateful to you guys for letting this happen.
I want to know how many audience members have been thinking, I wonder what celebrity I think Fred looks like.
Oh gosh.
Shut up.
You don't need to share that.
Well, I will say, and I can't believe I'm saying this, that I was walking down Mission Street the other week, and some young, no, she wasn't young, she was like middle woman, just kind of looked at me because I was wearing a mask, and I'd taken the mask off, and she just kind of said, you remind me of the guy from Bridgerton. Oh, but that really happened a week ago. If you watch Bridgerton, the guy's like 20 something and has a full head of hair. He doesn't have a receding hairline like I do. Whatever.
He's a good looking guy though, Fred. I would take it.
I'll take the compliment.
And you know what? Hey, the recognition, the people are confusing you for are getting more modern. So
yeah, they are.
You go.
This is very true. You got it more.
Awesome. Well,
Anyway.
Thank you all for being here today, and for sharing so much information about this. And hopefully it wet the whistles of some of the folks interested that came to the webinar who are going to view it later. I can't wait to share it with everyone. I can't wait to see it on our stage. It's going to be fantastic. It's running August 20th through 29th, Fridays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. and Sundays at 2 p.m. Tickets are available by just going to paplayers.org. or calling our box office at 650-329-0891. And we're also going to be streaming the show for an extra week after that through September 5th. So we'll be recording it if you feel like you're not ready to come to theater, you can still see the staged version of it. But with that said, we want to make sure we let you all know we're following every state and county guidance, going above and beyond to make sure that we're keeping everybody as safe as we possibly can. Everybody involved in the show is vaccinated, and we are making sure that on our staff side, everything is going to be extremely safe. And of course, there's details on information about audiences, mask requirements, and vaccination information and testing and all that available at paplayers.org. So I encourage you all to take a look at it. But it is going to be a wonderful evening at the theater or afternoon if you come during a matinee. Fred's going to bring it every time. We know that for sure. And
I will.
I'm really excited to see this on our stage. I'm sorry. But yes, thank you all for coming. Thank you for being here tonight, gentlemen, for sharing all this information. Everyone have a wonderful night, and we'll catch you all at the theater. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Stay safe.
Bye.